When someone pulls away after hurting you, it's natural to read that distance as a kind of verdict. It can feel like proof that you didn't matter enough for them to stay, talk, or repair things. But that conclusion often misses what is happening underneath, especially with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. For an avoidant person, distance is rarely just, I don't care. It's not a full emotional shutdown or a clean break. More often, it's a protection response that activates when emotions become too intense, too exposing, or too hard to manage. The moment they realize they've hurt you, something inside them shifts. It's not only guilt, it's exposure. Suddenly they are aware that harm has been caused, and now there is pressure to respond, repair, and take emotional responsibility. For someone who is used to safety through independence and emotional control, that moment can feel destabilizing. Vulnerability stops being optional, so instead of moving closer to repair the situation, they often move away to regain internal balance. From the outside, this looks like indifference or lack of care, but internally, it's more about trying to lower emotional overload than rejecting you. Their mind starts looking for relief. Distance feels like a way to reduce intensity. Thoughts form quietly like, if I stay, I'll make it worse, or I don't know how to fix this properly, or I need space before I say the wrong thing. So stepping back starts to feel like the safest option, even if it doesn't actually solve anything. It only reduces pressure in the moment. This is where the core misunderstanding happens. You are left experiencing their distance as abandonment, while they experience it as regulation. You are carrying the emotional weight, needing clarity, acknowledgement, or repair. Instead, you receive silence. And that silence doesn't feel neutral. It feels like another layer of hurt on top of the original wound. The key difference is this: avoidant withdrawal is focused on self-regulation, not relationship repair. Real repair requires emotional presence, discomfort, accountability, and staying engaged even when it feels heavy. But self-regulation prioritizes immediate relief over long-term resolution. So they step back, often without realizing they are prolonging the emotional gap. There's also another layer. Closeness itself can feel risky to them. It's not just intimacy, it becomes responsibility, confrontation, and emotional exposure. So after conflict, closeness feels even heavier. If they don't have the capacity to stay present in that discomfort, withdrawal becomes automatic. But what they're protecting themselves from is emotional pressure, not real danger. This is where irony appears. The same distance meant to prevent emotional overwhelm often creates disconnection instead. What starts as protection slowly becomes the very thing that breaks the bond. On your side, it becomes confusing because their internal experience doesn't match their external behavior. They may still feel something, but they don't act in ways that repair or express it. And relationships are not sustained by feelings alone, but by consistent communication and repair. Distance in this context is not a measure of your worth. It reflects how they handle stress and emotional responsibility. Still, that doesn't erase the impact on you. Intent and impact are different things. Even if their withdrawal comes from fear or overwhelm, the result is still absence, uncertainty, and lack of closure. That leads to an important question. Do you keep interpreting that distance as something to wait for, fix, or chase? Or do you recognize it as a limitation in their ability to engage in repair? Because avoidance that delays accountability doesn't create safety. It creates delay. And repeated delay eventually becomes emotional loss. Underneath all of this, guilt often exists, but not the kind that leads to repair. It becomes heavier, more identity-based, like I am the problem instead of I need to fix this. That shift makes return feel emotionally difficult. Instead of moving toward resolution, they move away from the feeling of failure itself. So distance starts to feel like control again, even though it's actually avoidance. Real responsibility would mean staying present with the impact, not stepping out of it. The complication is that guilt doesn't disappear in distance. It lingers quietly. But instead of pushing repair, it reinforces hesitation. If I go back, I'll make it worse, or I won't handle it well, become internal narratives that keep them stuck. From your perspective, this is confusing because guilt usually leads to apology and action. So when nothing happens, it can feel like there is no remorse. But sometimes the feeling exists without turning into behavior, and that's where confusion grows. You are left in emotional suspension, sensing something is there, but never seeing it translated into repair. Over time, that waiting becomes its own kind of emotional pressure. You start questioning yourself, wondering if you're expecting too much or misreading the silence. But silence here is not neutral. It is the absence of repair. And understanding the psychology behind it doesn't change the outcome for you. Empathy should not replace responsibility. At some point, the reason for withdrawal matters less than the reality it creates. And the reality is simple. Without action, there is no repair. Even more confusing is that they can miss you and still not return. Missing you creates feeling, but not necessarily action. The same internal fear and discomfort that caused the distance still blocks movement back toward you. So you may become something they think about rather than someone they reach. Memory replaces presence. Idealization can even form, where the connection is remembered in a softer, simpler way, without the full emotional demands of real interaction. But even longing doesn't always lead them back, because returning requires facing what was unresolved. And for someone who avoids emotional intensity, that step can feel too heavy. In the end, distance is not a clear statement about your value. It is a reflection of their capacity to stay present in emotional responsibility. And if that capacity isn't there, the connection can exist internally in feeling, but still fail externally in action. They stay in a place where things feel safer in thought rather than action. And that's where the gap becomes most painful for you. From your side, love is expressed through presence, effort, communication, and showing up even when things are uncomfortable. So when someone goes quiet, doesn't reach out, and doesn't repair what happened, it naturally feels like a message. It feels like you didn't matter enough. But the situation is usually more complicated than that. It's not that you didn't matter. It's that what you brought up emotionally required more capacity than they currently have. So instead of facing that level of emotional demand, they retreat into an internal version of the connection that feels easier to hold, one that doesn't ask anything from them. This is where the imbalance forms. You are living in the reality of what happened, what was said, what needs repair. They are living in an internal version made of memories, feelings, and selective reflection that doesn't carry the same weight of responsibility. And those two experiences don't meet. They run in parallel, but they don't connect. That's why it can feel like you are holding something real while they are holding something distant. You are responding to the relationship as it actually unfolded. They are responding to it as it exists in memory. And memory doesn't demand accountability. It doesn't require apology, explanation, or change. It allows emotion without action. But connection without action is incomplete. Real connection is built through participation, consistency, and effort, especially when things become difficult. When that is missing, the bond doesn't stay stable in real life. It starts to fade in practice, even if something still exists emotionally in their mind. So you end up in a confusing position. They may still think about you, still feel something, still recognize your importance, and yet remain absent from your life. Naturally, you hope those feelings will eventually turn into action, that time or distance will push them back toward you. But feeling and readiness are not the same thing, and until both align, nothing changes in a meaningful way. The clarity that becomes necessary here is this. You cannot build a relationship on someone's internal experience of you. Thoughts, memories, or unspoken emotions cannot create stability if they are not supported by consistent behavior. Without action, they don't create safety, they create uncertainty. And over time, uncertainty weakens trust and emotional security. So even if they miss you in silence, even if they carry parts of you privately, that alone is not enough to sustain something that requires real presence. What is not expressed cannot be shared, and what is not shared cannot be maintained. When you look at the full pattern, distance, guilt that turns inward, silence that still contains emotion, you begin to see the core conflict in avoidant dynamics. It is not just leaving, it is leaving while still internally attached, because inside there are always two opposing forces. One part wants closeness, connection, and emotional safety with you. The other part fears what closeness demands once it becomes real: vulnerability, responsibility, emotional exposure, and the possibility of being overwhelmed. These forces don't cancel each other out, they exist at the same time. So when they pull away after hurting you, it is not a simple, clean decision. It is internal conflict in motion. One part knows there is care, the other part believes staying close will only increase pressure and emotional risk for both of you. Instead of resolving that tension, they step out of it. Distance becomes a way to regulate the internal discomfort. They hope space will make things easier to manage, but what gets contained doesn't get resolved. It just pauses. And then the cycle continues internally, even in silence. The feelings don't fully disappear. The desire to reconnect doesn't vanish either. It returns in quieter moments when distraction fades. In those moments, the pull is still there, but almost immediately, resistance follows. The awareness of what would need to be faced, explained, or repaired comes back with it. So they remain stuck between two emotional states, one that moves toward connection and one that pulls away from it. That's why they often stay suspended in between. Not fully present, not fully gone. From your perspective, absence feels like clarity. If someone cared enough, they would act. If they wanted you, they would show it. That logic makes sense because in most healthy dynamics, emotion does translate into action. But here, emotion and action are disconnected. Feeling exists, but it doesn't consistently become behavior. And that separation creates confusion because what you see externally doesn't reflect what might be happening internally. So this isn't a situation of pure emptiness. It's a situation where emotional presence is inconsistent, but behavior is not reliable. There may be awareness, care, even longing at times, but not stable expression of it. That's what makes detachment difficult, because there is enough emotional signal to create hope, but not enough action to create security. Time doesn't automatically fix that. Distance doesn't automatically turn fear into readiness. In many avoidant patterns, time actually reinforces distance because it makes withdrawal feel more familiar and less emotionally risky. So the internal conflict doesn't disappear, it just becomes quieter outwardly while remaining unresolved underneath. And in the end, what defines the relationship is not what someone feels in silence, but what they are willing to do in reality. Because without consistent action, even the deepest emotions remain unfinished. And unfinished things cannot hold two people together in a stable way.